Hi, today we're going to talk about the outer planets, the planets that were discovered in the modern age that are further from Earth than Saturn, further from the Sun than Saturn even. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and also other celestial bodies that we've discovered, like Chiron, asteroids. So these are a subject of controversy in astrology nowadays, as they were not a part of astrology till they were discovered by astronomers. And so the meanings attached to them are far more recent and are subject to far more variation and discussion. And there just doesn't seem to be a place for them for many people who work with ancient or traditional astrology, as they see it. Astrology deals only with the world we experience, so only with the visible planets, things that are visible to the naked eye. Of course, there are many in-between solutions, but today I want to talk about an argument of Proclus, right, from the 5th century of the Common Era, about the existence of such invisible planets. He has an argument. I read it in another video, and I want to go through the argument with you. I think this is one of the interesting points about Proclus for people interested in contemporary astrology. So the first point to be made is that Proclus is an ancient author, and for him physics is about the world we experience, right? Cosmology is about the world insofar as everything that's perceptible has to be organized, according to Proclus, into a single whole, right? A single totality, and that's the world, right? The world is a necessary structure of being, of experience. Aristotle had already argued, and Plato had already argued for the necessity of there being only one world, but for Proclus it's a much stronger necessity than the necessity that Aristotle argued for. So Aristotle still sometimes does thought experiments with the idea of multiple worlds. So for instance, he'll say, oh, the world there could be many worlds, therefore time can't be the motion of the heavens, because then there would be many times. But it's absurd to say that there are many times, just as it's absurd to say that there are many number series. So Aristotle puts the necessity of there being one world below the necessity of there being just one timeline or one number series. For Proclus, it's the same kind of hard conceptual necessity. So the world isn't just an object that we find. It's a necessary fact about perceptible things that are organized in this totality, in this living totality. The world for Proclus is alive and divine. So he starts with that, right? So he also believes that, physics is about what we perceive, it's about experience, and it's about what's necessary in experience. But he still has a place for these invisible planets. Why? Well, he goes back to a dilemma or a puzzle that Aristotle had already pointed out, which is, so consider the ancient view that each star, since we see it moving on its own, right, that's how we perceive the stars. They rise and they set and nothing's pushing them. We can't see anything pushing or pulling them, right? They're moving on their own. So each of them is an animal, is a living being. And since they always follow these rational circular paths, since Plato, they seem to be divine living beings, perfectly intellectual, immortal living beings. So consider that, and consider the fact then that in the cosmology that Aristotle developed on Platonic presuppositions and that Proclus inherits, there's a first sphere which has all the fixed stars. Each of those stars is a living being. So there's a multitude of living beings in this first sphere. And then you get each of the planetary spheres. And each of these has exactly one star, one visible star, the planet. And so you have multitude, then you go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and then you get to the moon, and then you get to the Earth below the moon, and now here again there are tons of living beings, which are mortal, unlike those which are immortal, but still, there's a discrepancy here, right? So there's a multitude, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and then an infinite amount if you take infinite time into account. So there's a leap here, right? And so it's precisely to assure the continuity of the world, which Proclus bases on other theorems and other arguments, in order to make sure that the world is a continuous whole. He says, well, we have to say that there are multiple living beings at each level, but we only see one that's true. So the other ones, they have to be invisible. So there are going to be these other invisible things in each of the planetary spheres. And what's the significance of the one living being that we can see in each of these spheres? That's the leader of the whole group. He says that for the fixed stars, the leader of that group is actually the sphere itself. And then for each of the other ones, since these are inferior multitudes, each of them has two leaders. There's the sphere and there's the visible planet, right? So there's going to be the Saturnian and invisible planets that are led by the visible planet and also the sphere of Saturn. Same thing for the sphere of Jupiter and so on. So, and that's an interesting thing when we think about the outer planets astrologically, because one thing that I've seen astrologers mention and discuss is how the new planets have drawn significations, drawn meanings in contemporary usage, in the usage of modern astrologers, that used to be proper to some of these other planets. And now it would make sense if we have that each of these planetary multitudes in Proclus has a leader and then this subordinate multitude. It makes sense that if one were to start to take into account some of these invisible entities, that they would actually pick up on a certain part of the significations of that leader, right? And that would also give a clue in Proclus's cosmology, if one wanted to include these outer planets, how one would go about fitting them in, right? Because so you'd figure out through the significations under which of the planets it would be led, right? And then you'd put it there. So that's just a neat little tidbit of Proclus's cosmology that can be of use and interest to people into astrology today. And it really raises the question about, what more can we discover? What more can we argue about and say this thing that we think is just a bare empirical fact actually responds to something necessary in the structure of experience? This is the kind of question that we'll be dealing with in my course, Time and the Gods, that I'll be teaching in November and December. This was just a little foretaste of what we might be seeing.